This call
Hello.
is being recorded.
Hi, Dad.
Hi, Annie. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's been a good day today. No complaints.
Well, I'm calling to start the Tommy Farrell Chronicles.
Well, that's really a great name. I like that name. That sounds like a TV show.
Well, okay, so you told me you wanted me to take you back to 1969 to start your story.
The reality is, when I look at my life as we're talking, I think about, all the stuff we do with my dad, and there's so much, but there's been so much written about my dad and so many things that have happened that, we'd be talking till I was 95 just on him, So I think that when I said about 67 or 69, it's because that's when Frankie died, and that's when things, as far as me becoming me, that's when it started.
Makes sense.
Yep.
What do you remember most thinking about that year?
Well, there was actually, that year was the worst year of my life because, I had married Kay, and I got married to Kay because my dad was dying in 67, and he wanted to have grandkids, and we were lucky enough to be able to tell him that, that Kay was pregnant, and that we were going to have a child. And back then there was no ultrasounds, and so he wanted me to name the baby after his dad and me, Tommaso. And as you know, because you're the sister, I kept my word, and my oldest daughter was named Tommy. And back then that was unheard of. We didn't have ultrasound, so when I was expecting a boy, because my dad, being Italian, said, you name your first child after you, and so I'm Italian, so it was going to be a boy. Well, wrong. And so then, I was thrown for a loop, but I kept my promise. But, after he passed away, then Frankie was like, the head of the family. I mean, my brother was 11 months younger than me, but a strong individual, very, very strong individual, very, very strong-minded and a strong person. And
how did he handle your dad's death?
Frankie was, I'm sure it tore him up inside, but Frankie was one of those guys that never showed it. He was a true leader. I mean, he was all city, all state, all American, full ride scholarship to Arizona State baseball. When my dad died, we were actually at the hospital when my dad was dying, and I remember I was married to Kay at the time. Frankie was single, and I just couldn't take it anymore. So I left, and a week later was Thanksgiving, November 24th, 1967. He passed away. Frankie was with him, and I wasn't. Frankie was just a very, very strong individual. We were 11 months and 12 days apart. We were the same age for 2 weeks, but he was always the guy that was like, the leader. He really was, and so yeah, I think he took it hard, but you'd never see it in him. He wasn't like that. So he, basically what was happening is that I was still in school, college, and he was taking over my dad's business, and everything was going kind of smooth. And then all of a sudden he goes to Chicago to go to a party. I remember like it was yesterday, the day that we were sitting in the kitchen, and we were living at my dad's house on Fleur. So it was Kay and me and Tommy Kay and Darcy and Frankie, my mom, and Johnny and Willie and Carmi.
Everyone together?
Yeah, it was a huge house on Fleur Drive. I mean, it was a huge house. And so, we were all there together. But he wanted to go to Chicago too. As a matter of fact, the more I'm thinking about it, Kay and I and Tommy and Darcy were living in we moved out to an apartment. So it was Johnny, Willie, Frankie, and my mom, and then Kay and I. So we had just moved out. The more I'm thinking, we did live there for a while with him, but at that time, I was in the kitchen when he was debating on going to Chicago to meet Rocky Marciano for a party, because it was with a bunch of famous people. Andy Granatelli was a famous race car driver and designer of cars, and in that sports world of car racing, he was very well known. and a guy named Ken Harrelson, who Frankie really liked, who was a ball player, and there was another Italian guy who was a ball player, and I'm trying to think of his name, Joe Pistone, I think. I don't remember, but he wanted to meet those people. So he decided to go, and the sad part about that part is too, then they were coming back, we were having a birthday party for Rocky, and we had all the relatives, everybody there, because Rocky Marciano was first of all, being Italian, he was, like an idol to us. He was an icon, the only undefeated heavyweight champion in the world. And he was a friend of the families, and so he was coming back for his birthday, and we were going to throw him a big party at Uncle Bill Randa's charcoal room. They called it a restaurant. So everybody was there. There must have been at least over 100 people there. And we were waiting for them to come in, and I have to go back. What happened, Frankie had called me earlier that day, and because Rocky was so well known, and he used to get bugged a lot, Frankie said, try to get a hold of a friend of ours who was a private pilot, who used to fly the governor around, actually, and see if he'll come and pick us up. And I made a few phone calls, and I couldn't find him, and there was a bar across from the airport called the High Flyers Club. Sammy Paterno owned it, a friend of ours, and all the pilots used to hang out there. And so I went there to see if Sam knew if he could find the friend of ours that was the pilot. And just coincidentally, there was a guy sitting there that said, I'll go get him. I never met the guy in my life. His name was Glenn Bells. And he just said, I'll go get him. I've got a pilot's license, and I can fly him back. I'd like to do that. And back then there was, only landlines. So I had to call Frankie, and by the time I got hold of him, it was like an hour later probably. Frankie said, okay. And they met at the airport. I think Midway Airport is where they met. The sad part about it was back then they could fly without instrument ratings. He didn't have an instrument rating. He had a license, but he didn't have an instrument rating. And coming back, there was a bad storm over in Newton, Iowa, and the guy he got vertigo. He's upside down in the plane, and it smashed into one tree. There was one tree in the field, and all three of them were killed. So that night, it was like I still had reoccurring dreams of those Italian ladies screaming and yelling. They had those howls. They howled, and that haunted me for a long time. And then when Frankie died, it was like my whole world was turned upside down because I was expecting him to just take the reins and everything was going to be good. And so here I was, and the sad part was Frankie's birthday was August 14th. He died August 31st. And I turned, we were the same age, 22, and I turned 23 at his funeral. So that was kind of sad. Wow. September 2nd. But then, then my whole life changed. I mean, now I'm responsible for my two children, and Johnny and Willie and Carmi and my mom, who was like a child herself. And
I have a question. At 22. So did you guys find out about the plane crash at the birthday party? Was the birthday party still going on?
No. What happened was, we were all there at the party, and Aunt Edith Cataldo heard on the radio of the car that a plane crashed in Newton, Iowa. And she came to the party and told everyone? She told everybody, and that's when I heard the howling and screaming, what's wrong? And we didn't hear anything because, there was no way to communicate. It wasn't like we have cell phones like I'm talking to you now. There were landlines, so there was nobody to call to find out. We didn't know. You had to call the authorities, and I was so shocked that my cousin Johnny Morrow and Michael Morrow and Bobby Cataldo, those kids, Georgie, were there. And so they found out, and they wanted to go identify the bodies. And I rode there, but I couldn't do that. So Johnny and Michael Morrow and I believe Bobby. I think Bobby went in. But that's how that happened. So it was just like the worst night of my life. The worst night of my life. I can't
imagine.
Even with my dad. My dad
was
sick. Yeah, my dad was sick for a while, so we he was sick, and we spent a couple of years knowing that he was sick. But with Frankie, I mean, he's 22 years old, and a dynamo. I mean, everybody in Des Moines knew him because he was that special athlete. He was all city, all state, all American, all everybody knew him, and he was really one of those one in a million kind of guys. So yeah, so here I am. I'm 22 now, with how many people was that? 7 people. Johnny, Willie, Carmi, Tommy, Darcy, my mom. So I had 22.
Okay.
That was kind of. Oh. So then what happened was I got a lot of misdirection as a young kid. I mean, we had this beautiful house on Fleur Drive, and for some reason Johnny Morrow was in the real estate business, and he convinced me to sell the house, which maybe was a good idea back then, but I don't think it was. But in retrospect, but we moved into this duplex, and what I wanted to do, and we had some insurance money that came from Frankie's death. And so, I loaned Kay's dad some money to get his business started, back in the day. Again, I'm 23 years old. And then I wanted to get into the bar business. So 2 of my friends, Francie Anania and Petey Moresco, and I started the bar. Petey and I put in the money, and Francie was the guy because his dad owned a place called Francie's, which still exists on Fleur Drive there. That was he had the knowledge of how to run a bar and what to do. And so we started our first bar, and I was 23. At 81,
where was it?
I still remember the address is crazy. 8131 University. It was across from Fawn Engineering. It's now I drive by it. It's a medical center, like a little medical diagnostic place for dermatology and things like that. But back in the day when we opened it up,
what was it called?
It was called the Extra Point Lounge, and back then there was 2 police officers, 2 in that area, which was actually Clive, and Des Moines ended. I mean, everything. There was nothing past what is now called A Street, but when you went down to University and you had A Street, which is 22nd too, there was nothing. There was nothing past it. It was all farmland all the way to Waukee. There was no buildings, no businesses, no anything. And this is 1967. So we were at the end of Des Moines. I mean, the very end of, far. And we were 3 South Side kids in West Des Moines, which we knew nothing about. But we turned that bar into an unbelievable place. We made it a live music venue. And we had some of the best entertainment from all over the country. I made a deal with a guy named Tony Catering, whose dad was a doctor, or his brother was a doctor here in Des Moines, Iowa, a famous doctor in Des Moines. But Tony was kind of a character, and he owned bars and restaurants in Dallas, Texas. And it worked out really fun for me. It worked out really well for me because in the interim, this is when everything started getting crazy with my life, because now it's been over a year and a half or something since Frankie died. And here I am at 23 years old in this bar, and I've got a wife and 2 kids, and all my friends were single, and it just it was just a disaster waiting to happen, which kept repeating in my life actually. And so at 23, we were running this bar, and it was the busiest bar in town. It really was, and the greatest entertainment. And I was getting all my acts from Texas, from Tony Catering. And we had a problem. My first wife, Kay, and I, because of me, because I was cheating on her. And the kid that I had hired as a barback, who was a wealthy kid, but he wanted to be a barback. His name was Fletcher, Mark Fletcher. Kind of told Kay about what I was doing and the things I was doing, which was wrong. And Kay left me, and she went with Mark Fletcher, ironically, to Dallas, Texas. And this is where my friends that are Italian, I was booking my bands from. So it devastated me that they left, but I had a chance to go, and see them a lot because I would book my bands from Dallas, and my friend also owned. He was one of the biggest importer and exporter of foreign cars in in the Southwest. So every time I go, he'd give me like a Lamborghini or a Ferrari to drive up to pick up the kids. So
how old were they when they moved with her to Texas?
They were young. They were like Darcy was probably not even. We were. It wasn't. She was probably 2, and Tommy K was like 4.
Mm-hmm.
So they're young. I never lasted very long with anybody, because. And again, I think about my life, and I think maybe it was because those years when I was just me and a 22-year-old kid with all that responsibility. I just, when that happened, I just kept running from the responsibility or the. I really don't know. I mean, that's a logical answer to why I've, been with 5 different women, have 8 different children with 5 different women, and can't seem to find, my a home. And it's funny at 75 because I look at it and that's all I really ever wanted was, have a place that say, here's the dog in the backyard, but I never could follow through. I don't know. But anyway, so we had a great bar. Our first bar was unbelievable. We were so lucky because we really, really, really had everybody in town at that bar, and it was it was at the end of this. There was nothing there, and we just
what were some of the music acts?
Oh, we had some of the best. I mean, we got them from Texas. So one of the best ones we ever had was a guy named Mark St. Romain and Quest, and they were really good because he was a great entertainer. His band was great, but he was also a comedian kind of a guy. So he'd do jokes and stuff, and then he'd sing, and it was like, oh my gosh. And we had some bands out of Minneapolis that were unbelievable. I'm trying to think of the name of them. I can't. It'll come to me later. But we, and these bands kind of throughout my career as a bar owner always were with me. I mean, I get them, because I had a succession of bars after the Extra Point, and the same groups came with me and performed at the other bars that I had, and it helped me. So it was really quite an experience. But the Extra Point's where it all started with me and music and bars, and and again, it was a very, very successful operation. And then what happened was, it was a funny story. Everything runs its course for a while. So we went from I think that was 1970, all the way to 1975, and it ran its course. And then I wanted to do something on my own, so I opened up a bar downtown Des Moines in the Hotel Kirkwood, which is right now. I'm trying to think of what it was. There's an Asian restaurant on the corner right there. Do you know what I'm talking about? Or in the Kirkwood?
Yeah, Wasabi Chi, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so I was in the bar behind it, whatever they called that bar now. It was a big bar, a huge bar. We called it
a rave place called Platform.
Yeah. Okay, so we had it. It was called the Blue Max. The Blue Max.
Okay.
And it was.
What's that name mean?
Huh?
What's Blue Max mean?
Well, I inherited the name because when I took it over, it was already called the Blue Max, and I didn't want to spend the money, or I didn't probably at the time have the money to really make major changes. The Blue Max, I think, was an airplane. It was a famous airplane or something. Blue Max. I think it was something to do with an airplane. But we just kept the name only because it was convenient for me. So what happened was I brought in the same acts that we had at the Extra Point, and people remember that. This is like 4 or 5 years after that, and that's where everything started getting really crazy for me because we really were very busy. I was the first one in town to run show bands, and so in other words, we had a house band called the Cavaliers, and the Cavaliers became really famous. That's Joe Hernandez, who unfortunately passed away, and Janie Hooper, who was unbelievable, who passed away too. They were both great. Janie was a great jazz musician, but we had guys like D'Artagnan Brown and people now that are more famous musicians perform as house band for me. And then we all every weekend we brought in a show band. And so what we do, it's just like Las Vegas. I mean, it was unbelievable for Des Moines, Iowa. So what we do is you get there early, and you get there at 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock, and the house band would be playing and dance music. And then at 10 o'clock, or I forget the times exactly, but yeah, probably 10 o'clock, we'd put on a show, and everybody would sit down at the show. So there's table chairs. You'd watch an actual Las Vegas type show. So every weekend I'd have a show band there, and my regular band that you could dance to. So Monday through Friday there'd be Monday through Thursday there'd just be the dance band, the Cavaliers. Well, and then one of the guys was a doctor, Dr. Stephen Charles Gleason, who passed away too. But he was a great drummer, and they'd play Monday through Thursday, and then on the weekends we bring in a house band. We bring in the headliner entertainers, and so we'd have that show band. And I can remember that feeling of watching everybody dancing and having a good time. And then they all sit at their tables with the candles on the tables, and this show would start, and it was like magic, to be there and watching it. And I did that, and it was like, this is really good, and it really was. It was amazing. And so that's when I started meeting people that would come to town to do other things, promoters and people that entertainers. And when the state fair came, we had one limousine service in town, and that was Mike Tonini back then. And he was also a funeral service, but he used the funeral cars as a limousine service too. And that's when I started me with celebrity, because and I'll never forget this night either. So Michael, and this is when they were just starting out and they were just good. Michael calls me and said, "I've got this group coming in, and I'm going to bring them to the bar. They want to have a good time." I said, "Okay." And so he brings in the Eagles, and that's when Joe Walsh was with him. So we start talking, and I got to be friends with Glenn Frey. We were just talking and talking, and ironically, he says to me, "I've got a girl that I used to date, and I'd really like to get a hold of her. I don't know if you know her or not." And I said, "What's her name?" And he said, "Paulette Godwin." And I said, "You got to be kidding me, because it's the girl I was dating." So it was really, I dated. No, I wasn't dating. I dated her. And then I quit dating her, and I was dating Frankie's mom, Juliette. But I dated Paulette for quite a year or two. But the funny thing about Paulette, she dated me, she dated Willie, and she dated Johnny, all three of us. She was a beautiful girl.
What was the order of that? Was it you first, then Willie, then Johnny?
Me first, then Johnny, then Willie. And she looked like Farrah Fawcett. No kidding. She looked exactly like Farrah Fawcett. But anyway, so Glenn Frey says to me, I said, "Yeah, I'll get a hold of her. My girlfriend knows her. They're best friends." So we get a hold of Paulette, and so Glenn first starts hanging with me. And so Glenn called me up a couple of times when he was on the road. And he said, "I'm coming back to Des Moines. I got nothing to do on Thanksgiving." And I said, "Great, just come over and hang with me." So he comes to town, and he stays at Johnny and Kay's Hyatt House, and it was over the Thanksgiving weekend, and so him and I went to see King Kong at the Riviera Theater downtown. There used to be a theater on the river down there called the Riviera, and we went to see King Kong. Then we went over to So's Your Mother's and had drinks, and then he had Thanksgiving dinner with us at Juliet's mom's house. And it was really good. And we stayed friends for a long time. I've got a funny story about that too, because at the time, Scott Dean, who was Juliet's stepbrother, was hanging around with us. And Glenn, back then, the Eagles, when they first started out, they were like a Colorado kind of a band. They'd wear the flannel shirts, and they were in between a country and, I don't know how you would characterize them when they first began, the Eagles, but their sound was a whole completely different sound that everybody loved it. But they were more like, Colorado guys, like flannel shirts,
John
and
Denver's
jeans and long hair. Yeah, well, they were even more than that, because they were really good. John Denver wasn't that good looking a guy. These guys were all good looking guys, but with the long hair, with the flannel shirts, they were just like you see now here in Colorado. So, anyways, long story short, I took him to the airport to leave, and I come back, and we're all sitting around talking. And Glenn had left his shirt in the garage, the flannel shirt. And inside the pocket of the shirt was a lid of cocaine. You know how they fold it over like a little packet, like a little packet of cocaine. Well, Scott Dean, who was at that time about 12 years old, opened it up, and it looked like Lick'em-Laid. When you open up that little packet of cocaine, it looked like Lick'em-Laid. So he licked it. And then he walked into the house and his tongue was numb and he was going, I'm in bed. His tongue was sticking out and he couldn't talk. And we all started laughing. Well, his mother, Yolanda freaked out. I said, he's going to be all right. You know, he's not going to die or anything. But his tongue was sticking out and it was completely numb from the cocaine. He was going, I can't talk, I might talk. And his tongue was sticking out. So that was an interesting story because, you know, and then I stayed. I mean, I talked to him quite maybe 3 years. We talk off and on, and then I just lost track of him. I mean, I didn't talk to him after that. And now he passed away, which is kind of sad too. But that's the beginning of me meeting celebrities that I got to be close with because it was a crazy time. And then after that, it just got crazier and crazier because I can go on to the next couple of years after the Blue Max. A funny story about the Blue Max. Well, Uncle Frank Farrell from Chicago called me, and he was involved with a trucking company called the Western Transportation Company. And they were a big carrier. The guy who owned the Western also had a big interest in the Sands Hotel in Vegas. And remind me later on to tell you about my honeymoon with Kay when we went to Vegas, because that was interesting too, because I got to meet Frank Sinatra. I forgot about that. But Uncle Frank calls me and he says, do you have any friends of yours that can speak Italian? Because what's happening is that they're robbing stuff off our dock. And if we could talk Italian to them, they won't know what we're saying, and then we can figure out what's going on and who's doing what and what. I said, yeah, I mean, I got a couple guys here that, so a friend of mine, Joe Pani, and Pete Leone, who could both speak Italian. So I hooked them up, and they had a guy come in from Chicago and talked to the guys, and he hired them. Well, the next week, I'm waiting, for those guys to come because Joe Pani was at the door, and Pete Leone worked the bar for me. So they come in and they're rolling two brand new cars. I said, geez, what? He said, well, we got company cars. I said, what? He said, yeah. I said, geez, I forgot what they were paying him. And it wasn't like now here, it wasn't a lot of money, but back then it was a lot of money. And I thought, what? How stupid am I? They got new cars, they got doing this, and I'm working my butt off here. So 6 months later, I called Uncle Frank and said, listen, I want to get in there too. Let me in there too. And that's how I started the trucking business, through those guys. And it was interesting because trucking, I fell in love with the trucking business too. So I got to become a terminal manager with Western Transportation Company and learned everything I knew about trucking. So off and on in my life, it was always like bars and trucking. And it worked for me for a lot of years. Pretty
Bars
good.
and trucks, it's like a country song.
Yeah, but in there, so when I went to work for the trucking company, then so many things happened because in that same year or 2 years, I was married to Frankie's mom, and who was a disco queen. She was like a disco queen, and back then, we talk about gay people now, but back then, there wasn't that many gay people. It was just started to be acknowledging gay people, and it started with me because. This is like 74, 75, right in there. And what happened was Juliet really loved it because, first of all, the music was, in the gay bars, the music was the best. There really was. It was unbelievable. And the shows were really good. They do all the drag shows and stuff, but it was unusual for Italian guys to even go into, I got a funny story, to go into the gay bars, because it was an oxymoron for us because, we were the tough guys and all that. And, you couldn't we couldn't understand that, because we didn't know any, you grew up your whole life and you never knew any gay people. You want to hear an interesting story about the first gay situation that happened to me, which is really unusual?
You gotta finish this disco queen.
See, I go back and forth because when I think about things from the, well, so all right, let me remind me because I'll tell you about what happened to me. So Juliet always liked to go to the disco. She would love it. And there was a place called City Park Disco, and it was above a Cleaners on 6th Avenue by the Cathedral Hotel. It was above Colonial Cleaners upstairs. And so we started going there, and she started making friends with all the gay people. And so I got to be friends. We got to be friends. I got the first time in my life, you talked to these guys, and they were, gay guys, and you knew they were gay, but you accepted it, and then I go back to the only gay person I knew when I had the Blue Max, and we used to call him Jimmy the Queer. And Jimmy the Queer was the coolest. He was like a heavy-set kid, not good looking. He wore a fake wig and wobbly high heel shoes, and he worked at the Savory Hotel. Back then, they had a restaurant. So when I had the Blue Max, after we get done with the show, we'd go over there because it was open till 2 a.m. Just walk over to the Savory and eat there. And Jimmy the Queer, and we called him to his face, Jimmy the Queer, and he was like, that's what he was, and he was a nice guy, and he didn't find that disrespectful, and it was part of life back in the 70s. It was just a strange situation, but he was a regular at our bar, and I loved him. He was a great guy, and he was also the waitress at the restaurant. But I'll say so we lived on Clover, Juliet and I, and on the south side. Right up the street was the Lincoln Theater. And I had lived in Clover on Calder Avenue, half a block, right? Not even a half a block, 2 houses from where I grew up. And that's where Juliet and I bought my Uncle Joe Cataldo's house. But Juliet got into this thing where we go to the theater to see the Rocky Horror Picture Show every weekend. I mean, every single weekend.
I wondered how you knew all the words. You knew all the words to every song, and I wondered how.
I loved the music. The music was absolutely positively entertaining. It still is to me. That music is great. It really is. That and Little Shop of Horrors. I loved those two things. I loved the music with both of them. But we'd go every weekend, and we met some interesting people. I know that Donnie Rand. We introduced Donnie Rand Duck. They call him Duck, to a girl named Olga. Olga and her brother became friends with Juliet, and they were Olga was gay and her brother was gay. And so, but Olga started liking Donnie, and so she they became a pair, and she just liked Donnie. And I remember one day, because she had a very thick Puerto Rican accent, and I remember sitting in the living room one day, and she looked at Donnie and she said, "Donnie, why they call you Duck?" Because she said, "Donnie, why they call you Duck?" And he was laughing. He said, "That's just the way I grew up, and they call me Duck. I don't know why, So that was a good time in our lives. That was the disco period, and so when Uncle Frank came to town to visit me, because I was in the trucking business at that time, through him, with a guy named Marshall Cafano. And if you get a chance, because you're smart, you Google him. This man was a notorious mafia guy, notorious. He was a guy that was actually Cafano, Calfano, I believe, Calfano, Marshall Cafano. He ran Las Vegas for the mob, but he was actually he was a killer. He was a hitman. He used to. I mean, if you Google him, you'll see he was a scary guy, but a little like me. He was small like me, but he was a tough, real tough guy. And I can remember when they came to town, they wanted to do something, and Juliet suggested, "Let's go to the gay club." And I'm thinking, I got Uncle Frank and Marshall. I'm not going to take them to a gay club. And Uncle Frank said, "Okay, let's go." And I thought, well, that's crazy. So we go to the gay club. We go to the gay club, and the guy was. I'm trying to think of his name, because we got to be friends. I can't even think of his name. This guy was as good looking as any girl you ever met in your life. Unbelievably. What was his name? Oh, you got to remind me later on, because it will come to me. But they were dancing, doing the drag show and stuff. And this one kid that was a really good looking kid was kind of, coming on to Marshall. Well, I was going to be that tough guy who's got to stop it, So I get upset because he was really coming on to Marshall. And Uncle Frank grabbed me by the arm really hard and sat me down. And he said, "Leave it alone." I said, "What?" And he said, "Leave it alone. That's all he knows." Because Marshall was in jail most of his life. So the homosexuality thing was part of his life. And so, like Uncle Frank in the scene, that's the first time I ever thought about how those guys will live their lives. They accepted that because that was not a wrong thing to do, because that's when you're in jail for 30 years, that's all you know. So I never forget that. He grabbed me by the arm. He said, "Leave it alone. That's fine." He said, "That's all he knows. Leave it alone." I said, "Okay." It's the first time I ever thought about that, ever. But so that was the disco period with Juliet, and then the same thing happens with me again. I mean, it's just I was always that guy that I don't even know what I was looking for. I obviously wasn't looking for because we had Frankie, and I was happy with the house now, and I had the backyard and all the things I thought I wanted, and then it was like, well, first of all, Juliet wasn't easy to live with. She wasn't easy to live with. I can remember, and that's one thing about divorce and children. You know what I'm talking about there. I can remember one time that I came home and Darcy and it was cold, and Darcy and Tommy were outside, and I said, "What are you doing out here? It's freezing." She said, "Well, Juliet didn't want us in the house right now because he was cleaning up," and I was like really mad, And so one thing led to another, and
were Darcy and Tommy K like back in Des Moines then, or were they just visiting?
They were back in Des Moines. No, they were back in Des Moines. They moved back, so they were here. I forget. Because I'd fly them back and forth once in a while in the beginning, and then they came back. I don't remember where Kay was. Kay was with Fletcher still. She was with Mark Fletcher, but they moved back here. But that only lasted like 4 years, 5 years with Juliet, and then I was doing the trucking thing, and that's when I met your mom. I met your mom at. And well, I was trying to think of all the things they did with the trucking thing, but there were so many things. I had met through the Blue Max so many celebrities. I mean, there's so many people came in and out of that place. It was like crazy. Peter Noon from the Hermits, and oh man, there was just so many.
When did you meet Leslie Gore?
Leslie, that's where we're going back. See, I missed that. So Leslie, no, not really though. It was about after I left Juliet and I was working for the trucking. Pete Riccelli owned a place called Riccelli's on Fleur, but it was on Fleur Drive. He had the Riccelli's restaurant on, and Pete and I and Johnny, my brother Johnny, became really good friends with Pete.
Was Riccelli's good then? Because it got gross.
Yes, no, it was really, really good. Pete was a guy that knew how to run a business. He was really good at what he did, and he was like Frank Sinatra. He was really a cool guy, but not. He knew everything about the restaurant business, but as far as life goes. He was an uneducated man. He knew how to run a restaurant. He went to jail for a while for manslaughter because he hit a guy when he was younger and killed him. But Pete I loved him, and Pete was generous to everybody. Pete gave if you needed something, you go to Pete, and Pete would give it to you, and he really would. And Pete bought a house on Park Avenue. Now you'll know this house. When you go down Park Avenue, where our street was, where you keep out. On what street was that? 24th or 22nd or whatever that was. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you take a right going down the Fleur, like going towards not Glen Oaks, so Southern Hills. You take a right from that street, Park Avenue.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's the big house on the left. Pete Riccelli owned that great big house on the left, huge. And when he first bought it, he invited me and Willie to come over and look at it. So we walk into the house. I'm with Willie and it's garish. I mean, it's like bright red shag carpeting and gold. and so Willie said it softly. He didn't think Pete would hear. He said, and Pete's like a real Italian guy. He said, "Oh, God, who decorated this place? Larry Flint." And Pete turned around and said, "No, Lillian did it herself." Larry Flint is, the publisher of Hustler magazine. He was terrible, So who published it? Who decorated this? Larry Flint. And he said, "No, Lillian did it herself." Then he said, "I want you guys to come downstairs because you know what I got down there." And he said, "What?" "You won't believe it." I said, "Well, what do you got?" He said, "I got a Suzuki." I said, "A Suzuki?" He said, "Well, it was a jacuzzi." We started laughing. That's the kind of guy who was always a cigar, real smart. And then one time we were. This is true. We were at the restaurant, and these two guys came in, and they were like getting smart and acting up and kind of laughing like the Italians. And Pete said, "I don't like those guys. Go over and give the guy a slap." And I said, "Yeah, I'm sure I will." So I walk over and I said, "What are you laughing at?" And he said, "Well, I wouldn't know what business are yours. Big guys too." And I said, "You better watch what you're talking about, or you're paid for it." And I slapped the guy. Well, the guy and he didn't do anything because we were sitting with about 5 or 6 guys. Didn't do anything, and so we leave. The guy was Don Polite. Do you know who Don Polite is? Don Polite is the guy that runs. He ran the Stivers, and the other guy was Stivers. The Lincoln Mercury Stivers.
Oh yeah.
The car dealership, Don Polite. Mm-hmm. So what happens is, So afterwards, I take Pete home. I drove him home, and Skip's was open. Skip's had just opened up not too long after, before that. So I thought I'm gonna stop in Skip's, and because Lisa Howard used to work there, and Lisa Howard was like totally a cool girl back in the day. She was totally. Do you know who she is?
Mm-mm.
Lisa Howard is the real estate agent for the East Village. If you Google Lisa Howard, you'll see she's all over the East Village. She. If you're going to rent anything in the East Village, it's Lisa Howard. But anyways, so I decided to stop in there. I stop in there, and there's 5 people in the place, and 2 of them were the guys slept in Stivers, down Fleet and Stivers, and there's nobody else. And I remember that. I can remember this. I had on this gray silk suit that I loved this, and I had just bought this shirt, and I used to monogram my sleeves, And so the guy comes over and polite and says, "Okay, tough guy, what are you gonna do now? I mean, what do you want to do something now?" Start pushing me. So I figured, I can't back down from the guy. I can't back down from him. So I said, "What do you want to do?" And I got Cuban heels on, like 4-inch Cuban heels. Like I had high heels on.
God.
High heels on. I have the shoes actually still in my bedroom right now. I can show you.
They were can't even wear 4-inch heels.
No, they were really. I mean, they were seriously. Would you come here? I'll show you. I got them on a rack or on display. Anyway, so I said, okay, let's go. So we go outside. I take off my jacket. And I'm thinking, my whole time, instead of thinking you're going to get killed here, I'm thinking I'm going to wreck this shirt. Damn it! That's what I remember walking down that ramp. They had a ramp. I'm going to wreck this shirt. Son of a bitch, And so anyways, we start going at it. He was killing me. I mean, he was killing me. He's 4 times bigger than me. But I was trying. And then Skip and those guys ran out because Skip heard about it because he was and he pulled them off. And so I said, okay, well, whatever. And I acted like a big shot. And then I'll never forget the next day I woke up and my ribs hurt so bad. I was like, I couldn't even move. And then P.D. Leon called me and said, we're going to go get him. We're going to go get him. So he had a gun. So I said, I don't want to kill him. I just want to, I like to get him. So we go. He lived in Fleur Drive in that the Barbican. Not Fleur Drive, but I mean Grand Avenue. The Barbican. That's the one that looks like concrete blocks.
Oh yeah.
Remember where I lived? Yeah, that one looks like concrete. He lived there. So we drive by there. We couldn't find him, so he shot the mailbox that said his name or something. I forgot what he did. But it was like, crazy.
Was your shirt ruined?
Oh yeah, I wrecked my shirt. The shoes came out okay. I didn't break any heels or anything. The pants actually were okay, but the shirt I wrecked. The shirt was totally gone. Yeah. So I mean, it was crazy, and that was my trucking. That was the part. So and as I was doing my trucking calls, one of my accounts was where your mom worked. I'll never forget walking in first time and talked to your mom, and she was married at the time, and her husband was giving her a bad time and stuff, and she was gonna. I don't know if they were separated or not separated, but we started talking. Next thing I know, we started hanging out. And your mom in the very beginning was really a lot of fun. She was really nice. She is nice. I mean, I would say but back then she was kind of quiet but nice. Really, really.
Mm-hmm.
She was beautiful. Your mother was absolutely knocked down, dragged out, beautiful. She really, truly was. And that was an interesting story. Then, then I was with your mom for a little bit. And we had a good time. We lived out, where Steve Vale lives? That's where we got married. That Grand Avenue. What's the name of those apartments? The real nice ones. They had a brass elevator. It was gorgeous. You know what I'm talking about?
I don't think I know where he lives.
Do you know where that mansion is? The mansion, the cathedral had a deal there, the archdiocese or something. Well, anyways, if you go down Grand Avenue, where the gas station was on the corner there, what is that street, 24th or 25th or 26th, whatever it is. There's a gas station on Grand Avenue. Okay, on the other side of the street, now that's the governor's mansion, right? And you're going west. You're going west, and then it's right by the Des Moines Community College. But there's that really pretty high-rise on that side on the south side of the street. So we got married there. That's where your mom and I got married. Tommy Renda marriage that we lived there for a while. And then,
I don't know if I've ever even seen your guys' wedding photos.
We didn't have any wedding photos. It was just small. We just had Judge Renda come over, Tommy Renda. I think my brother Willie was there. I don't even remember who was there, actually. There wasn't very many people. We didn't have any kind of like a big ceremony or anything.
Just hearing like a little. Sorry. Your mother got.
I think she had just gotten divorced. I mean, I think. I don't really remember.
Just hearing a little bit about a wedding, it's like I'd love to hear how you proposed to all your wives.
I don't remember how I proposed anymore. I know the one I do remember was Kay, because I came home and I didn't want to get married, and my dad had bought the ring and everything because my dad wanted me to get married. So I mean, I said okay. I mean, I'm 20. I got married on my 21st birthday. That's what I tell you about going back to that. On my 21st birthday, and we had a big, huge reception at Rocky's White Shutter Inn, and Rocky's was right next to the Airlanes bowling alley. They knocked it down, but it was a beautiful steakhouse right next to the Airlanes, and we had a beautiful ceremony. And then he sent us to Vegas, and I turned 21 that day. She's not even 21, and he said to me, there's a guy named Tommy McDonald who's going to meet you. Then you're going to go see Frank Sinatra. Well, back then I liked the Temptations and the Four Tops. And Sinatra was like, to me back then, he was like Lawrence Welk. I didn't want to, I didn't give a shit about that. I want to hear, I want to hear the Four Tops. You know what I mean? So, because we didn't have that kind of respect for him as when you got older, because he was popular, but he was popular with the old people, and I was young, So we didn't like him. So we got to sit by the stage. He came over and acknowledged us, and they put a bottle of scotch on our table. It was thinking about it, it was like totally amazing the way we got treated. Kay got drunker than a skunk, and she threw up all night long. That was my honeymoon. She threw up all night long, sicker than a dog, because she wasn't even 21. So it was crazy. It was crazy. We were there for the weekend, and we couldn't gamble. I could gamble, she couldn't gamble. So she couldn't go in the casino. So it was like, oh my God, crazy. But my dad sent us there. And then he, we just got married in September, and then he died in November. So, he got done everything he wanted to get done. So, but then with your mom, that's when it all got really crazy, because that's when I started Jukebox, and that was like, oh my God, that was like.
I think we'll save it. I think we'll save it for another episode.
Huh?
I think we'll save it for another episode, Dad.
Yeah, you got to. Well, we didn't even talk about Leslie Gore. Pete Richelli, we started talking about that, and I lost track. See, so that's what I'll talk to you about when you call me next time. Remind me, write it down. Leslie Gore, because Pete had that place on Fleur, and
I'll write down Leslie Gore and then Jukebox. That's what
not only that, but don't let me forget this too, because I got to be friends because I wanted to open a restaurant, a bar, and I wanted to call it Fabian's Fabulous 50s Club, and because Fabian Forte was like a big star. Do you know who Fabian Forte is?
Yeah, only because of you.
Well, if you Google his picture and look at him, he's the worst singer. I've got a record of his. The worst singer that ever. He was the worst singer that ever walked on the earth, but he was so good looking that the girls would scream and yell. He couldn't sing a note. Then they backed him up with other girls behind him singing, but he could not. When he sang, it was off key and horrible. I mean, terrible. He was terrible. But he was so popular, and I knew that if I opened up a Fabian's Fabulous 50s Club, I would make money. So, and I really wanted to get back in the business and get back in it, because I was doing trucking, and I wanted to get back into the bar business. And so I had this plan. And so I got to be good friends with Fabian. And Fabian actually came, and if you Google Fabian and read about him, how big he was, what a star, he came to Pete Richelli's daughter's wedding as my guest to entertain for
oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's how good I was. I was good back then. I really was. So that's where we'll start, going back there.
Okay. I'll make a note. We're going to talk about Fabian and Leslie Gore and Jukebox.
And also the Diamonds. The Diamonds. You know who the Diamonds are?
No, but you'll tell me next time.
La, 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 la. You know the Diamonds.
I don't think I know the Diamonds. I'll look it up.
The Lion Sleeps Tonight.
Oh, gosh. Was that what you were just singing?
I think they're the Diamonds. No, they sing the song. La. Like, how does it go? Well, just look up the Diamond song. The Diamonds. That's to be good friends with them.
I will.
All right.
I love you so much.
I love
Thanks,
you.
Dad.
All right, bye. Talk to you later.
Good night.
Bye.